Okay, I think we're good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, let's see, and Stephanie, I guess since we've kind of been leading the first phase of the project, do you want me to just go ahead and run through where we are and what we have found so far? So my CPE colleagues are familiar, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen if that's all right, so you can see some of what, so I can walk you through some of what we've been working on. So the team here at U of L, and by team, I've got a doctoral student, and then the research center that's been working on this that I run is actually full of first generation low-income students and students who were formerly in foster care. And I just kind of want to point that out because this has been a really fun project. They're all from Kentucky. We've got 3 of them from Eastern Kentucky. And I think this is a project that's been really near and dear to many of their hearts as we're going through and collecting data. So kind of the first pass at getting a sense of institutional supports for student basic needs has focused on a hand search of institutional websites. So we started with the 9 institutions that are part of the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative. But then as we were getting into it, we thought it would be pretty useful to actually be able to compare those institutions, assuming that it's kind of a self-selected group, to compare those institutions to all the other post-secondary institutions in the state. And so by all other, I mean private and public and all levels and all sectors. So we just finished the hand search of all the institutional websites, which was not a small effort, but the team did a great job. And I'm just going to kind of give you just briefly show you, and I can share a copy of this with you, Lily, if you'd like to share it with our colleagues at EdTrust. But so we developed, I mean, this wasn't rocket science, but it was labor intensive, and we wanted to be as careful as possible in the way we search the institutional websites. And we know there are limitations to this, of course. There could be informal provision of services at an institution that we're not going to capture this way. And also, as I'll talk a little bit more about shortly, is this doesn't give us this is sort of a yes or no. It's dichotomous variables that we're looking at, really. It doesn't give us a good sense of like the accessibility and the equity built into these services, but nonetheless, we think it's a helpful starting point. And so we dug into some of the literature, relied on a definition of student basic needs, and I'm going to just scroll up here, and so basically came up with search terms that we plugged all of these for these different categories of basic needs, plugged all of these search terms into the institutional websites to see what we could get for all of these services. And then we created, I'll jump over here, just a database where we would put the URL for this service. And again, this is just giving us a sense, is there something on the institutional website that says it addresses that service? And I should note that these aren't always institution specific. I'm sorry, these are not internal to the institution always. One of our charges was to look at partnerships with external entities or agencies. So like, for example, in mental health services, we find that some institutions partner with community groups to provide mental health services to their students. So that's what we did. We just hand searched some websites. And then we had the students went through, and another student did the same search for the website. We're still going to go through and do another check and just sort of spot check some of these institutions. I'll talk more about that. But so far, this is where we are. And as I said, we actually literally Monday, they finished up the 49 institutions. So just briefly, some of our findings here. All of the 9 institutions, I'm going to scroll down to this table here. All of the 9 institutions in the collaborative have some form of student basic needs supports. We found that mental health across all the institutions was the most common form of student support that was provided, followed by food pantries, medical services, and then you can sort of see down here, yearly housing, emergency aid. We did find only one institution, and for those of us that are familiar with Kentucky, this may not be surprising, but Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, which is of course a special mission institution and would serve adult students. We couldn't find any mention of student basic needs supports on that institutional website. One of the questions we had, though, and this is drawing from some of our work on retention and retention efforts at institutions, knowing that if you have someone who's in charge of something, that can often change the institutional approach to that thing. So whether it's retention or multicultural affairs. So we were curious if we could identify on the website a single point of contact at the institution who was in charge of, even if that person didn't oversee all the student basic needs supports, we wanted to see if that point of contact was sort of acted as a liaison to refer those students to the different supports. And we only found that at the University of Kentucky and Henderson Community College. So that's a quick overview of our findings. I'm just, as we've been digging into this, I think it's raised more questions for us. So we wanted, this project sort of expanding on us here, but it's I don't know, it's super interesting. So we've downloaded IPEDS data for all the institutions in Kentucky because we want to getting, I think, more kind of the access and equity side of things here. I mean, we just have basic questions, right? Like, are students more likely to have access to basic needs supports if they're at a relatively wealthier institution? So we want to look at, disaggregate some of these services by things like endowment per FTE, rurality versus urbanicity. Of course, the provision of supports for transportation for students is going to look very different in Louisville, where every student, like at U of L, can ride the bus for free versus more rural parts of the state. And we want to break these services out by a few other characteristics of the institutions as well: Pell Grant recipients, students of color, and then sector, and then level. We also, as we were talking through these findings, have questions about like where these are located administratively within an institution. And so we're considering this. This is the first you're hearing of this, but perhaps we can have a discussion here or later about this. But we're curious if they are where these services are housed, particularly at the 9 institutions that are part of the collaborative. So are they typically housed as part of a TRIO program or in student affairs, for example? Another question we have with this, which I think may be a little harder for us to get at, or it could be something that is kind of a follow-up study, is where the sources of funding are for these supports. And then I mentioned earlier the question of accessibility. So we know it's one thing to go to a campus website. So you take U of L, and we have a right by campus, proximate to campus, is a childcare center. However, it's affiliated with U of L, but it's not owned by U of L. And to get in there, there's a pretty lengthy wait list. And you either have to be a faculty, you have to be a single parent student, and you have to be able to get off the wait list. You have to be a faculty member, or you have to live in that neighborhood. So it's a question of, is that really, yes, there is something here at U of L, but is that really accessible to students? And those are actually, frankly, probably when Zitzi and Stephanie talk more about the other kind of the more major parts of this project, that's something we'll probably get better sense of from the interviews and focus groups. And then I think, we have some questions about, in terms of our reporting, in particular, maybe disaggregating these certain forms or the categories of supports. So that's kind of where we are, where we're thinking of heading next. And obviously this is, it's fresh and we're still working through it. So we welcome constructive feedback on all of this, if any of you all have it.
Jake, I apologize if you've already referenced this, but do you see a way to do any disaggregations based on type of student served? I know you're looking at institutional characteristics.
Not from the data that we've collected in the IPEDS data, but Zitzi and Stephanie, maybe you can speak to that since you all are headed up the focus groups and interviews.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we can, to the extent that our respondents give us some information about that. So that's actually a really great segue into the first part of the qualitative work, which Stephanie, maybe I'll talk about the administrator interviews and you want to take the student focus groups. So following up on Jake's and his team's audit of materials that are online, we're close to IRB approval. We're almost there. Stephanie and I will go out into the field onto these 9 campuses to talk to administrators and to talk to students. So the administrator interviews will be with designated point people whom we've heard from, whom we've been connected to by Lily and her team. And these are people who, like Jake said, are sort of associated with the provision of basic needs in some form or another on campus. And our first step will be to ensure we're talking to the correct people. So, we'll check in with the folks that Lily has connected us to and just ensure that the right people are in the we'll do these interviews virtually in the virtual room whom we should be talking to. So ideally we get people from each campus. And so then the very first part of our interview protocol with these administrators is to actually look at the website data that Jake and his team have collected with them. And so this is where we go beyond thinking of these as dichotomous variables and try to get some more in-depth information about the extent to which those lists that we have that Jake put together are complete, the extent to which they feel that they're incomplete, and then also to get more context for those services. We'll ask them additional questions about who may not be represented on a university's website in case there are community-based agencies who are helping meet student needs. And then we'll ask more specifically about guidelines for eligibility for any of these resources that again may or may not be available online. So here to actually get at the question, then we'll then turn to asking them if they have any formal or anecdotal information about students on their particular campuses who are making use of basic needs resources. And to the extent possible, we'll try and probe for, our students using resources around food, accessing food versus housing versus emergency funding or whatever the case might be. And we also want to probe them for the extent to which they know who is not using these resources, right? Where they perceive unmet needs, and also why those, what their perceptions are of why students might not be using these resources. We have some questions about obstacles and barriers to greater use of these resources. And then we'll sort of end by turning to thinking with them about how does their campus, quote unquote, advertise these resources, taking into account that information is reaching the correct students in a way that's responsive and relevant and not stigmatizing. And then we want to sort of check in with them about how, if at all, the ongoing pandemic has shifted the ways in which they're offering resources. Maybe they're offering more resources online, and sort of how they're talking to students with them about these resources. So that's sort of the bulk of the substantive focus of the administrator interviews. We'll check in with them about what we should be asking students in focus groups. And so I want to, this is implicit in the way Jake and I have talked about it, but this project is, we've tried to design it to be both sequential and a little bit iterative. So the findings from the website audit will shape the administrator interviews. We'll ask towards the end of our administrator interviews what administrators think we should be talking to students about. And then we'll ask in student interviews, of course, what they think we should be talking to administrators about. So that was a very long answer to the initial question.
Lily, can I ask one question there? Sorry. Let's see, I'm wondering, you mentioned there might be some questions around context. I'm wondering if you think you might be able to learn anything about what the administrators understand or view about the role of state government, state policy in terms of their ability to meet students' needs. So they have beef with the Department of Human Services because of eligibility they set for some program, or they're really loving the access to data that they get, or, you know, so I wonder if that's kind of inbounds for the conversation.
Yeah, so we don't have a formal question about it, although I think happy to add that in if this group thinks that is valuable information. Um, One, I think that that might come up in some cases. I expect it'll come up around the question of facilitators and barriers to getting students access, right? If there are sort of higher level programs like sort of state government programs that are supporting or facilitating access. Two, I'm wondering, and maybe Stephanie, this will become clear when Stephanie talks. I wonder if students will raise it, right? Like I'm not turning to my university for resources because I am eligible for supports or resources or aid in this other way. But I don't see why we can't add it as a probe to our existing protocol, just to make sure that it's covered in the administrator interviews.
Bill, and it's, yeah, I really like that. I think, you know, to help the work within our organization, I think to really have a deeper understanding of where we can add value is probably something that Lily wakes up every day thinking about. So, and I don't know if you would elicit those kinds of remarks without them being prompted. Does that make sense? Because I don't think people might be thinking that way, that there are opportunities for collaboration or, you know, innovations or information sharing um, throughout the state without those direct questions. But I might be wrong there. I don't know what other folks think.
Yeah, and it's the sort of gift of qualitative research is that we can add those probes in, and so this is great feedback. Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a question? You may have already collected this information, but are you looking at how these programs are staffed? Like one institution may have like a full-time person who devotes all of their time to this, or another institution might have like a financial aid counselor who's like informally splitting their time, or grad students. Is that a part of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, Jake, go ahead.
Well, no, I was gonna say that's a great question. I think the closest we've come is seeing if there's a point of contact for the services, but that's something we can probably through going back to the website and then the qualitative work, we can maybe get a sense of that. But I mean, we know that's important, right? If you have one person doing this that has 5 other hats, then that's different than a dedicated staff member.
And can
Yeah,
I was just
sorry,
gonna
I
say,
was just gonna go ahead, Gabriel.
okay, thank you. I was just gonna say, going off of Victoria's point, not to like overcomplicate things, but like with this from the staff perspective as well, possibly considering like turnover rate for staff in these offices that could, you know, impact the stability of their like ability to carry out their jobs as well and connect with the students and to know the community at these schools.
Yeah, this is all great feedback. I think sort of we could have implicitly gotten at the answer to Victoria's question by sort of who administrators were pulling into interviews, but I think we should explicitly ask to the extent that we're walking through all of the services that a campus is offering at the beginning of our interviews with administrators. I think it's a great idea to ask about sort of how these different programs are staffed, just so we have an idea of the time and level of institutional support these programs are getting. So thank you.
And we know when I first reached out to our campus points of contact and asked them to identify who's your program administrator, we asked for specific areas: food security, housing security, and emergency aid. And so some schools gave us back 3 names and other schools gave us back 1 name. And sometimes that 1 name was the VP of Student Affairs, who is not doesn't actually have the full-time capacity to dedicate to serving students in that way on all 3 of those issues. So we know that there's definite staffing disparities in how institutions are able to support the work. So I think that that's a really good point. And even just seeing how every institution staffs it differently, there's not like a protocol, or there's not a typical way of supporting basic needs work, because it's still relatively new and emerging, I think, in the student services area. So I think all really interesting findings.
And I would add that when you do run across someone who's tagged as being responsible for these kinds of services on a full-time basis, you might want to ask what their target population is, because I'm thinking of the TANF contract in community and technical colleges, where staff is, full-time staff is well funded, but their target population is so very limited.
That is really good, Shauna, because as we're having this discussion, I'm thinking about the contact person that was given for EKU, and she is our executive director of diversity and development. She's not, her title and if you pull up her job functions, it isn't linked to student services. It isn't linked to basic needs. There are other people at the university that do it. So I'm wondering if we're not going to find out in our interviews that the people that actually do a lot of these things are different than the person that was assigned to this project when the university signed on.
Yes, that, and the people that do a lot of this work sometimes are limited as to their target population because of funding sources.
Sean, I think that's such a valuable point, because before you said that, I had in my mind, oh, this is great if you're learning, like, okay, here's who's on the basic needs team, and it's 5 FTE at this institution and 2 FTE at this institution, and then you compare that with the IPEDS data Jake pulled, and then you can get a ratio of like, okay, what's the percentage of the ratio of students to advisors or whatever. But you're saying that might not actually be a true ratio if the counselors aren't able actually to support like a big chunk of the students. So I really appreciate you. I had not thought about that perspective.
I just wanted to share that we've been out on campus visits since this research has begun, and I have already been talking about this asset map as an incredible tool for all of our colleges to be able to utilize, to say, if you're, who's out there doing something in housing security because we're not sure what we can possibly do to support students, here, we're going to have an asset map that'll show you, here's 15 colleges that have something. And we hope that it links to the right place, where I guess I'll have to dig in and really see if these are basic needs supports, or if this is the link to the residence life page, but getting a good sense of how the resources, the partnerships, the way programs might be structured, like, can really help each other build out new programs or think creatively about their work. So they've all been very, very enthusiastic about this asset map. And I really appreciate you going so above and beyond and doing 49 institutions instead of 9. Like, that blows my mind right there. Did you want to share anything on this? Did we talk of student focus groups yet?
No,
Okay, and I see we've had a few folks join us. So Carrie Welton and Melissa Bell, thank you both for being here. The faculty have kind of gone through a little bit of the first phase of the asset mapping, and also talked a little bit about the interviews they're going to kick off with the program administrators as soon as IRB comes through, which we thought this was going to be fast, huh?
U of L's IRB is very thorough, so.
Okay, so I can talk about the student groups and what we're doing with them. So The student groups are going to be completed at the 9 campus partners, and we're using the campus point person to recruit students for those. And we're looking for 7 to 9 students for each focus group. But we're doing 2 focus groups on each campus. And one, the students that we are targeting are students that have been identified or identify themselves as having used services. The other group of students, the other focus group, is students that have not used services or haven't said that they've used services. And so once the 2 groups are recruited, we're going to actually, Zitzi and I, I'm taking a student with me. Zitzi, are you doing a student with you? Taking a student with you? Okay. So we're going to go to the campuses and then conduct these focus groups. We're going to do them each in one day. Lily very graciously offered to provide pizza for them. So we will eat and then have the focus group. And we start out with just, kind of a basic overview of what we're doing, then do some, just some housekeeping and we're using a verbal consent. And then we're talking about the first question, the kind of icebreaker question is, how did you hear about the group? And then the questions for the students focus on, and particularly for students who have used services, what kind of challenges did they have related to their use of services? And we've divided it out into finding and keeping housing, ensuring they had enough food to eat, getting to and from campus or the services that they needed, finding and keeping childcare, dealing with any kind of mental health issues, any kind of medical issues, accessing financial assistance or aid, and then also asking them if the pandemic has shifted any of their needs. So how much of this is related to the pandemic. So then we're going to talk to them about where they sought help for these needs and what barriers they experienced while they were seeking that help. Where did they find information? What was their experience accessing the need? So kind of open-ended to get them to talk about, really, and that could go from anything like, I felt really embarrassed, or I was really encouraged by the people that were there. I felt really protected. Then asking them if they had any needs that were unmet, anything that they were not able to find help from. And then recommendations. So recommendations for improving resources or service, or improving information. So not just what would you do better, but how would you provide information better about that? And then recommendations of overall access to basic need services for the students at that school. And then for students who have not used services, we're just going to ask them if they have had any challenges related to those basic needs, the housing, the food. So not whether they've used services or sought services, but have they had those challenges? And then if they have not needed any services, because we have students that don't need resources, do they know of any friends or peers that did? And then kind of utilizing that information. If they needed services, where would they go? Do they know where they would go for services or where they would go for assistance? Like, what information do students have before they have any kind of need? And then also, if they have any recommendations about improving resources or services or improving information. And then again, that same question about recommendations about overall access to basic needs. And then at the end of both focus groups, giving students a chance to share anything that we didn't ask about, anything in particular that we didn't ask about. And then we're going to give them a survey. We're going to have them complete a survey that asks where they attended college. This is an anonymous survey, where they were attending college. So which group they were in, how they, their current gender identity, their current age, their racial or ethnic background, whether English is their first language. And then we're asking them to select if they are a full-time student, an in-state student, or a first-gen student, because those are, we're looking to compare part-time with full-time students and students that are in-state versus out-of-state, and then of course, particularly looking at first generation. And we give a little definition that is first in your immediate family to identify college or to attend college.
Did I miss it, or are you going to identify like if they're a Pell recipient?
We did not ask that. We can do that.
And that's how we identify low income. And that may or may not be useful information.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I wondered, Shauna, even if about limiting the universe of potential students in the conversation to students with Pell Grants or not. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but especially thinking about the category of people who did not use services to you know, if there were 7 students who like had Pell Grants but didn't access any of the services, maybe might be fruitful to understand their experience, because maybe it's more likely that they could benefit from them, whereas somebody who is paying full tuition and room and board on their own and doesn't need any financial assistance from the college, probably less likely to need other kinds of assistance as well. But I'm not sure.
Well, one thing
And
that makes
that
me,
was my thinking. That's the reason I brought it up.
Well,
I mean-
here's one question. If one of the things that we're looking for is how well students on campuses can find out the information about basic needs on campus, the one benefit to not specifically asking Pell Grant recipients is that you're more likely to find students that don't have any supports around them, that truly might have to, if they have a need that comes up, that truly might have to find needs. So I'll give you an example. I have a student this semester who her students are paying for her tuition. She comes from a very economically comfortable family, but she had a falling out with her parents due to a situation with her boyfriend, and she lost her housing. Now, she's not someone that's involved with Pell Grants, so some of the places that I might typically send a student, she didn't have relationships with because she had never needed those services before. So there might be an advantage to having students that aren't already tied in with services that are directed toward low income students.
That's a really good point. So I wonder if, as you work with the administrators to construct the sample, to have some kind of representativeness that you think reflects the right diversity, yes, both in terms, so maybe it's, 4 people with Pell Grants and 3 people without Pell Grants, and then racial diversity in terms of, okay, if, based on the population of race, ethnicity of different groups of students on campus, then, probably we want to have 2 Black students and 2 Latino students and 3 white students, or whatever it is for the institution to reflect that, maybe.
Yeah. Yes, that's an excellent point. And that's one of the things that we didn't mention, is that our intention is to, for Zitzi and I to meet with those contact people, the point of contact, and do exactly, Phil, what you're talking about, saying this is, and I think that Shauna brought this up last time, to be very careful that we are not getting students that are all in one specific pot. Shauna, weren't you talking about not getting the work ready people, make sure that we, yes.
The TANF ready to work students that get far more support and case management than anyone else. And I understand and totally agree with where the 2 of you have landed. It still might be useful to understand in the responses who is Pell and who isn't.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Phyllis, do you want to go ahead? Phyllis?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question about the recruitment process.
Oh.
Did I hear you say that, first of all, thank you for all of this that you're sharing. It's very helpful to me. In the recruitment process, were you going to allow the point person to select the students, or were the point people, will they be given parameters around student groups to go to and, and things like
Yes.
that?
Yes. Yes. So we are going to suggest that we are going to give them guidance about what we're looking for and how to questions to use and that kind of stuff in seeking those students, making sure that they are representative of the student groups that we want. And then Phyllis, I think that Zitzi and I said that the students will be the participating students, then we'll do the final look at the final group and then select from the students that are interested. We'll go back and make sure that the group looks reflective of what we're looking for.
Mhm. Okay, yeah.
I have a thought. I have a question on the asking students their financial status. I mean, I'm not sure if that's a question that you would want to ask. I mean, you want to identify, like, you have a strong identity with your race, or, some of these, how old are you? Like, those are very basic questions. That doesn't strike me the same way that asking someone if they receive a Pell Grant does, and I think that would be a sensitive area that I would probably, and I don't also think that the program administrators are going to be able to, here's a list of our Pell students, or here you have 8 students that are in this group and I know 4 of them are Pell. I'm not sure they're going to be able to share that information just because it's so heavily protected through the financial aid offices anyway. Sometimes you can get a proxy for it by looking at, if they have a work study award or something like that, that could be a less kind of invasive question. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how do you get at this, income, this financial stability component without making a student maybe feel like they have a deficit?
Jake said, I think that students may not know the answers or may obscure their class identity. At some schools, we're going to know, like at EKU, the majority of our students are Pell Grant recipients. So pretty much regardless of where, what that looks like. I think that the answers to the questions are kind of going to provide information as to the level. So if in a focus group, it turns out that of the groups that of the students, if 7 of 9 students say that they have accessed all of those services, we're going to have a pretty good indication that those students are that the student group that we got is going to be more focused on low income, right? And so I don't know what is the goal of finding out. Are we trying to determine whether services are targeted to all students and information is available for all students and all students are able to get those services if they need them? Or are we looking to see if certain population groups are looking at it? So like, for example, I can see why we would look at race, because that could impact in ethnicity, and especially whether they're English speaking or not, because that definitely, we know that those things impact access. First gen impacts access because they don't even know what questions to ask a lot of times, right? They don't even know what is available, so they don't know to ask those questions, right? But are we looking to see whether only low income students can find these resources, or are we looking to see if any student that needs a resource can find it? So like I guess what I'm asking is, why specifically would we want to know about one group of students by income rate?
Well, I think it's the equity component of the audit. And so, like, really, if you need additional supports in order to be successful, we want to make sure that you have access to those. So in that sense, it's not just, can all students look it up online? It's really, you know, how do we go out of our way to ensure that the students that might be at greatest risk of having a non-academic barrier knock them off their path, make sure that we're embedding these resources and supports early for them. I mean, that might be, Dawn, did you have a thought on that?
Yes, I have spent the last 5 minutes trying to find out how to raise my hand. So I'm glad I was like, what they're doing? What am I doing? Not doing? But I was just thinking you hit the nail on the head when we talk about equity and the data that we tend to collect from the DEI unit when we look at one group of individuals, which are historically underserved populations, one, and then we look at also how we are supporting our students that come from these low income households. I think to answer Stephanie's question, for me, it's a both and. I'd be interested to know if one, do all students have access to these supports, and then of all students, are the ones who's taking advantage of it, and so do our students from these backgrounds uh, have the information? Do they know it? And I think it just couples well with the data that we tend to look at from the DEI perspective. So I think it's kind of a both and for me.
I'm just wondering if we're focusing on first gen non-English speakers, and then we're specifically looking at race and ethnicity, and disability status is another one that would be good to use. That's another one. It's kind of hard to get that unless the student, the student discloses that. But if determining whether they're Pell Grant recipients or not, it's hard to get it that it's hard to determine whether it's hard to poll students that are specifically low income unless you're asking your point of contact to go seek people that you know are low income, right? Which then doesn't give you a representative pool. That gives you a pool that particular person knows, right? Which I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I guess that would work with a focus group.
Can I, and if you said this before, apologies, but are we also going to zero in on parents?
No.
Is there any thought to do that? It seems to me that one of the challenging basic needs for students increasingly is finding resources to support childcare while they're going to school.
Oh, yes, we asked that question. Yes, that is one of the questions. I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about their parents. One of the specific questions is finding and keeping childcare.
And maybe this is more on the kind of the quantitative side than really the qualitative, but have we asked any questions around data collection for these students? So do the institutions usually like capture data of students who have maybe used some of these resources? And the reason I ask is just from I also look at it from a capacity gap perspective of, if we could look at maybe these students and look at who's likely to need these services, then you could look at it from the perspective of, okay, do the institutions kind of have the capacity currently to meet those needs, from a demographic standpoint or an income standpoint or something like that. So I'm just curious. I know, Willie, we had discussed it, a couple of times in the past, but I don't know if that's something that varies across institutions. Maybe some institutions may collect, student information who do, who do use these programs, and others may not. So maybe that's just, probably not very feasible, but just curious.
Well, I don't know. I think with things
go ahead, Stephanie.
With things like the food pantry, like I know that our university does track how many people come into the food pantry and how much food is given out. I know that our student mental health services are tracking numbers. So I'm going to bet, Travis, that there are numbers that are available. Now, it might be going to how many students checked into the student health center, how many students checked into this, like going to those other, going to them piece by piece. But I think that information is available.
I will add to what Stephanie said, just by saying hopefully some of this will come out in the administrator interviews. And so part of the thinking in doing the administrator interviews first is the extent to which we can figure out how much that data varies across campuses, Travis, and then also that hopefully that can then inform student recruitment at various campuses. Because I think you're right. I think to the extent that we can use the data that campuses already have to inform who ends up in these focus groups, I think that'll be to our benefit, particularly for the focus group where we want to zero in on students who are using campus resources.
Perfect. And the reason I was asking is I was looking at it from more of a perspective of, if something like a student ID or something, if we could get something like that, and I know this is not going to be something you would ask in an interview, but from the campus side, then that would facilitate, research from our side to be able to say, then we wouldn't have to ask the question, are you low income? Are you not low income? Because we would be able to see that and aggregate it at the level it needs to be, without kind of having that awkward conversation.
That would be a whole different IRB.
And probably a much more difficult one.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that I agree that it's important that we capture information about socioeconomics, and whether that's through a Pell proxy or a first gen proxy. I mean, I think that with the scope of this study, we're really documenting and describing, and I think we're going to get a peek into access and equity around these services. But I don't think this effort can really capture, right, to the extent to which these services are equitably provided to students across the institutions. I mean, and I think the best information that we'll get on that institution-wide will probably come from those, 5 institutions, Lily, that are participating in the Student Financial Wellness Survey, where you should be able to, those students will be asked, did you use X, Y, and Z service? And we can peg that to indicators like first generation, race, ethnicity, and I believe Pell Grant receipt as well. I just think it's going to be really hard to get a deep sense of socioeconomics here and accessibility of these services.
Yeah, and this is so of the overall equity audit project, this is the really important, I think, the qualitative piece of it. We also have, Carrie has done a policy scan in Kentucky. We've got the data analytics project, with Travis and KY Stats. And then, of course, the Action Network is going to continue to bring more of our stakeholders from different, beyond the higher ed, campuses, the SNAP, whatever they're called, the intermediaries, as well as the workforce folks and the other state agencies, the cabinet. And so it'll be, pieces of information, hopefully lining up to really help us see where are the greatest barriers and how do we increase access and scale supports for students with an equity focus. So I think I love the student voice component of this, and I'm sure that amazing insights will emerge that we can't even anticipate. So.
I wanted to offer one more thing. I just texted one of my good friends who's a financial aid director in the state, and she said you can release the information without you can release students' financial aid information without identifying the student. So I think that right there doesn't help. And so my second question to her would then be, well, what if the question was asked of the student on the in the protocol? And she said yes. So I don't know if that's helpful to what you all are thinking and still doing right now, and that's from a director of a private school.
Well, we can put that on the, well, I don't know, Jake, if we can at this point, but on the student survey, that
Okay.
could be, this list below includes a description of different types of college students. And so if that isn't out of, if that isn't out of the scope of our IRB approval, we could do that. Okay, that sounds great. So we can add that on there.
Any other Ed Trust thoughts or, overall impressions?
And I think this was mentioned before about like community resources, but so like if students who are not in the like TANF Ready to Work program or whatever, maybe you're like super familiar with that, but like other students have maybe accessed SNAP or TANF or something, there would be some prompt that would kind of have that emerge in the conversation in addition to understanding if they like accessed food supports on campus, that would come through somehow.
Yes, because the prompt the prompt says, what kind of challenges have you experienced related to finding and keeping housing? So if the student says, I've been on the waiting list for, the subsidized housing for 10 years, which
Got it.
they could say.
I just want to say the thing I said to Lily when she first mentioned this, like, oh my God, how cool is it to have faculty members from 3 different institutions working collaboratively, looking at the whole state, trying to dig into this like really important thorny question of what students have access to help them like live and study at the same time. We're working with a handful of states across the country doing work like this, and this is the only place that had said we want to use our strategy and resources to try to marshal a team inside the state that includes our, scholars and sounds like also students in the research work, and it's just like super exciting. And I think our role at EdTrust primarily is to try to document the process that states are using to audit themselves on some dimension of racial equity related to higher education. And I'm really excited to tell the story of what you all are up to here before we even know what you're going to find, because I think it's like a replicable model that others could use, a state agency working in partnership with faculty members at the institutions to try to figure out how can these institutions better serve the students we're trying to serve. So I just think it's terrific.
It's very exciting for me.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, so much for being here, for all the great conversation and questions. Thank you, faculty, for your amazing work. And let me know if there's anything else that I can do to support you, or if I need to send any additional communications out to our campus partners. Happy to help there. Okay. Well, I hope it's almost the holiday season for everybody and you get a little break and not so many meetings. So I think we don't convene back together until January. So,
Just really quick, can you all please send over the documents that we reviewed with the overview of everything whenever you all get a moment?
yeah, sure. Jake, if you can pass those to
Yeah.
me, then I'll make sure that EdTrust gets everything in a shiny little folder.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll send them to you, Lola.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a great
Have
day.
a wonderful rest of the month. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.